Welcome back, our online delegates. We're about starting now the session for Rec A. It's been wonderful. We just concluded the session on Rec H. Permit me to invite, okay, so we'll just go straight into section. And our presenter and the facilitator will actually give us more details, but I'm just here to introduce Professor Truter. Professor Truter is our distinguished professor, and she is the director of School, Clinical and Medicinal Sciences. She's also a member of Rec A, so she's going to give us details just as we've listened to Dr. Daure. So please enjoy the session. She's online. I would like you to please welcome her with an applause before she starts the session. Thank you so much. Yes, Prof. Truter, the platform is yours, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Melari, and good morning, postgraduate students and colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you. I'm not going to be very long. I just want to quickly share my screen with you. I hope, can somebody just confirm that you can see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yes, I can see it now.
You can see, okay, 100%. Thank you. So I'm going to give you a very short overview of the Research Ethics Committee Animal. Okay, so I am privileged to be a member of this committee the past couple of years. I'm not an expert, but it is something that I've learned a lot from this committee, and there's definitely touch points between the Rec H committee and the Rec A committee. So if you go onto our university's research website, you will see research ethics. We've got two separate divisions. The one is the Research Ethics Committee Human, and then we've got animals. So whenever we do any project that involves animals, obviously there needs to be a formal submission to the Animal Ethics Committee, similarly as the Research Ethics Committee, but different forms. Okay, so it's similar but different. It's a university committee like the Rec H committee, so it covers all the faculties. However, it is mostly our students in the natural sciences, so the Faculty of Science and Health Sciences, whose proposals or whose applications serve at the Rec A committee. For our meetings, also the George campus, the Saasveld campus is included, which makes this very exciting because a lot of the, Saasveld, George campus is in the Western Cape. So there's quite a number of animal projects conducted in the Western Cape, but they're part of Nelson Mandela University because we've got a campus there. So we also have colleagues then from George campus on our committee. The chairperson is Prof. Pierre Pistorius. The administrative management is Mr. Imtiaz Khan is responsible for that. And then Mrs. Ursula Spies is the secretariat. We're a small committee, but it's quite a busy committee. The main difference, or one of the main differences, apart from the fact that we're not working with proposals involving humans and it's animals, is that we're not seeing the full research proposal. So we only get the ethics form, and hence the importance of the completion of the ethics form, that it is comprehensive and that it covers all the important things that we as a committee need to know about before we can approve or refer back or reject the proposal. Like all of our university committees, all our members annually sign a confidentiality agreement to say that what we are discussing in the committee is confidential, and we will never discuss anyone's proposal with anybody outside the committee unless instructed so. So like Reg H, it's a formal constituted committee with the formal documentation and all the processes in the university. Every meeting on our agenda, this is page 2 of our meeting pack. Our documents is our terms of reference. So the Reg A committee is a subcommittee of the university's Research and Engagement Committee. And here you can see the bullet points. I'm not reading them, but if you scan them, you will see that it is about the animals, to make sure that we treat them humanely. If we need to kill an animal for experimentation, that there's adequate euthanasia and the correct euthanasia for that specific species. So it's not, I don't want to say as easy as humans, but for humans, it's a human being. Here we're talking literally from we have approved from elephants, from it is our rats in the animal holding facility. People are doing research on spiders. They're doing research on fish, living things that are not humans except plants. It's an animal. So we are looking at vegetation. If the vegetation is affected by, say, for example, animal grazing, then we will look at that proposal as well. But the focus is on animals and the whole spectrum of animal species. Okay, so the current members, you can see it's a small committee, and you will see how this committee is constituted is that each one of us is appointed in a specific category. So I am in the Faculty of Health Sciences, Pharmacy, because there's a component of medicine that I will show you just now. I'm a pharmacist. There's a component of medication also in the ethics form that must be completed. So that's always the area that I'm very interested in and that I'm looking at. And I'm a category B member, okay, of the committee. So the membership composition, and this is changing now, it's currently happening. It is prescribed by the Animal Research Ethics Committee membership as per the South African National Standard, the SAN standard, as well as the Department of Health. So they say on each university or each ethics committee in South Africa, formal registered ethics committee for animals should have a category A, B, C, and D members. Category A is a veterinarian. I'm on the committee as a scientist with my knowledge of medicine. Then there's welfare, and then there's also an independent layperson. Okay, so that is a very strict constitution of the committee. It has to be like that. So we cannot meet if there's not a vet that day in the meeting. Then we can't meet. It is that strict. Okay, the typical meeting agenda is we start with a notice of the meeting, we take minutes, we confirm the agenda. We look at new protocols or new applications. So a new master student wants to study the estuary here at Swartkops, for example, and the animal life or the bird life in that estuary, for example. That will be a new protocol. We will only see, again, the ethics form and some of the additional documents, but we're not seeing the full proposal. We focus on, is this humane? Is it going to damage the species? Is there any harm done to the environment? We look at those factors. Then also practicals that are conducted in the BSc programs. We also, if animals are involved, if animals are sacrificed or killed, then that practical also needs to be approved by the Animal Ethics Committee. And then obviously also there's annual progress reports. Sometimes there's amendments extensions, study 1 is carrying on longer, and then also closing the study. It also relates, our committee also looks at the animal holding facility on campus, and then any other relevant ethics documents we discuss. So recently we've looked at the revised research ethics policy of the university, and we had the opportunity to comment on that. And then any other matters relating to animal ethics. And then also, obviously, we need to undergo training, because we are in this committee as sort of, I want to say, experts. We need to know, and we need to update it with the latest developments. So there's also training for us on a regular basis. Okay, so the committee meets 8 times a year. And there's before the meeting, there's a cutoff date for documents to be submitted to the committee. And again, if any of you are involved in any study related to animals, you're welcome to contact me. All the documents are on the website for animal ethics, similarly for human ethics, but for animal ethics, it's a separate set of documents. The documentation is comprehensive. I'm not going to read the slide, but we've got standard operating procedures, SOP, our university. Then we've got our guidelines for ethical conduct in the care and handling of animals. The Nelson Mandela University Code of Conduct for Researchers, and then also the research ethics policy that I just referred to. So we are abiding by national ethics documents and also the university's ethics documents. The policy on research ethics, this is the one that we recently looked at, and we were asked for comments, which we had to submit if there were any. And we did ask some questions about, for example, clinical research and training, like human ethics, what are the requirements? Often these procedures, for example, I'm not an animal scientist. If I want to do a procedure on an animal and I'm not trained to do it, it is unethical for me to do. So I first need to undergo training, and often it starts with training, and then the procedure on the animal or animals will be done together with a vet. Or a person who is competent in it, and competent means there's evidence on paper that the person has done those procedures successfully, but often the vet will be part of that project until the researcher and his or her supervisor are trained enough or competent enough to do it on their own. Okay, so we also have further documents, our SANS document, the care and use of animals for scientific purposes. We also look at the Medical Research Council, their documentation, their guidelines, and then the Department of Health, their research ethics guidelines, and then the WHO for animal health, terrestrial animals, that we also look at. So we all need to be familiar with all these documents sitting on the committee. It is quite diverse. We talk from a rat in or a mice in a laboratory, to research on lions, to research on birds, to research on any animal, any living animal. So it's very interesting. I will show you just now examples of project titles. So on the research website for animal ethics, there's the different templates similar to Rec-H. I think this morning you focused a lot on the research application with Dr. Dalrijk Radich. Similarly, this is the main one, application for approval, research. This is most of our projects come with the Rec-A form, and then we will work through that. There's also the practicals. So any practicals involving animals need to have ethics approval and an ethics number, otherwise they cannot be offered. So if you're a pharmacy student and you do research in the laboratory, pharmacology or chemistry or whatever on On rats, that practical needs to have animal ethics clearance. Then sample collection, there's a specific application for that. If you use external data from animal sample collection that has happened, say, for example, at the Oceanarium here in Port Elizabeth, or from at any of our other institutions, there's forms to be completed for that. Also, if studies must be extended, the progress report we've talked about, there's a completion of project report, closing report, and then there's an adverse events report, because these animals are often injected with substances. And like for humans, if there's an adverse reaction or a death, then it needs to be reported. So from time to time, we get from researchers, in my sample of 100 mice, 30 of them are deceased, and this is not normal for the, so it's a warning sign that something may have been wrong. So then we look at the animal holding facility, any conditions inside that, is it due to what the experimentation, the substance maybe that they were injected with, so it needs to be investigated. So any deviation from what is regarded as normal for the study will be investigated, and it will serve at our committee. And then there's also the normal draft monitoring forms for animal housing and all the other checklists that must be kept by researchers who work with animals. So our animal holding facility is in the biology building. That is also the building in where pharmacy department is, where my office is, building 12. It is in the basement. There's not always animals in it. It depends on how many projects are currently, laboratory projects are ongoing. But then remember, there's also animal experimentation, animal projects happening in game reserves, in nature reserves, and then also on George campus. But if you want to know about our animal holding facility, it is basement of building 12 next to the library. I've put this slide in because I'm not food, I'm not a sport, I want to live, I do not want to suffer. I'm a sentient, I'm a living being. So we are very careful when we look at proposals that animals are not killed unnecessarily. They can also suffer pain. If you punch something into a rabbit, there's a pain experience. That animal cannot talk back. So we're very aware, each proposal we review where animals are involved, we will all ask a lot of questions regarding any harm to the animal, any pain, any suffering. And then depending on that, we will say, is your sample size not too small? Because if the sample size is too small, the study may not be worth it. If the sample size is too large, why are you exposing so many animals to this procedure? So we focus a lot on the scientific correctness of the methodology in animal ethics, because no animal must unnecessarily suffer or any harm must be done. But animals are needed for experimentation, and we accept and we respect that. But we are sort of the custodians to make sure that we are not unnecessarily harming our animals. So it means able to perceive or feel things. Yes, it's an animal who cannot talk, who may be able to make noises if they're in pain or if they hurt, but they cannot necessarily talk back to us. So our vets are very good. Our people, our lay people, they are very good in often alluding us to, where's the fine line between this is experimentation and the animal is well controlled, or there's a potential for animal cruelty, strong word, in this experiment. So examples of projects, avian scavengers as indicators of recovery of an island biota. vegetation impact, space use of and human-elephant conflict in Malawi National Parks. I've just taken at random yesterday some of the titles. The treatment of breast cancer in mice with targeted and non-targeted gold nanoparticles. So that's typically an experiment that will happen in our animal holding facility. And then there was recently an honors class excursion to teach data collection in bird and mammal sampling in Renosterveld landscape in the Oeverberg in the Western Cape. And they went into nature reserve farms, so they needed to have, and they were looking at animals and some basic sampling of animals and how to catch animals. So it also needed ethics approval. And then you can read molecular scatology as a tool to update. So that is the excrement, what they defecate, and they analyze of the seabirds to learn about their diets. So it's a wide variety of topics that are dealt with, and a wide variety of animals, and also different areas of the world. It's not always only in South Africa. So the REC-H form, I'm going to be very short because you can, if you are involved in animal ethics, you can go and download the form. This is also similar to our human ethics, very similar. We want to know the name of the supervisors, the background to the study, the commencement date, animal ethics, only 1 year ethics approval, then it needs to be reapplied for. So it's given on an annual basis. And here, very importantly, this is now different to REC-H. Here, REC-A is saying experimental design and procedures. So the number of animals, if they are giving any medicine, drugs, and the dosages, any parameters that are measured, any surgical techniques, what are the qualifications, euthanasia, how will carcasses be disposed of? Okay, so there are documented procedures for these things, the guidelines that must be followed. Animal justification, if animals must be killed, how many? What is the risk of harm to humans? Because sometimes animals, if you work with them, you can also be harmed by, not harmed by the animal, but you can be bitten by the animal or scratched by the animal. So what is the risk, the harm and the benefit? Always the weighing up the two. And then the benefits of the study must be very clear. Can the study be done without animals, or are animals really critical for the study? And then the area that I said as a pharmacist, I'm always interested in if any scheduled substances are used, which substance, and who are going to administer it, and those things. Then remember, if we work in nature reserves or we work with certain animals, permits are necessary. So if, say, for example, they want to do a study and they want to transport animals from one area to the other, permit may be needed for that, or a permit may be needed to go into certain of our nature reserves and to catch animals there and transport them, or even if the study is conducted at the nature reserve, the contact with the animals, the permit is required. Then it is similar to our REC-H form, a declaration, and then the departmental approval. So us as reviewers, all of us are reviewing all the proposals because we've got specific things that we look at. So I said to you, I go through the whole proposal, but I will focus very heavily on the medication and substances, but all of us look at everything. So a reference number, and then we classify as low, medium, or high risk. And then our outcome is with corrections, minor, major modifications, resubmission, or not approved. And then this is the form we complete. So we get the application, we complete this form, and we make our comments, and then we submit this before the meeting to the secretariat, and then they combine our responses, and we discuss it at our ethics committee meetings. Okay, so this is our, in the background, our form as ethics committee members that we use to to make notes and to give feedback to the committee. And then by consensus, we will decide whether the study can go ahead or whether there are amendments to be made or not. So training is very important. I'm nearly at the end. Training is very important. All the usual ethics principles apply. So because I'm looking at the medication, I also have my good clinical practice qualification because I need to understand how, if there's a randomized controlled clinical trial that is run, and it is similar on animals, that I understand the principles. So training is very important. So I've got all my training for human ethics, but I also have additional animal ethics training. We always look at harm-benefit analysis. Each project is looked at on its own. We very carefully look at euthanasia. You can't use the same substance to euthanize, to kill an animal. It depends on the species. There are humane and not so humane ways of sacrificing animals. Is it really a need to sacrifice them? Is there another way that this experiment can be done? Then I already alluded to the importance of sample size and the importance of study design. So we're very strict on the study design and the sample size. If a person is doing on baboons a study and it's a sample of 3 and there's extensive investigations, we will say, is that enough to give a statistically significant result? Because you may be able to do a descriptive study, but is it enough for a scientific study? Then we may say, no, that study is not feasible or should not be approved. So there's similarities, but also differences. This is training that we've done into 2022 or end of 2021. So we get experts in from time to time to give us training, and it's also our responsibility to make sure that we are up to date with all the new documents as they are published. And colleagues, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening to me. At the bottom is my email address. You're always welcome to contact me. And if there are any questions, I am happy to answer them if I can. Alternatively, Prof. Pierre Pistorius is our chairperson of our ethics committee. He was in Antarctica recently with his busy with his research projects there, which we also give ethics clearance for some of his projects. So thank you very much to all of you, and also to Prof. Paula and her team for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Prof. Trita. We really appreciate that wonderful, insightful presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, online delegates. I can see the virtual upload. Do we have questions? Please ask it now when Prof is still around. Do you have questions, online delegates? No questions from about 23 online participants. And on site, how many are we? Also about 20 something. Yes, thank you.
Morning, Prof. Trita. Thank you so much for the presentation. I think my question would be, is the animal holding facility operational at the moment?
Thank you for the question. Very relevant question. No, not at the moment. It is being re-accredited at this stage, and we also are going to appoint more staff members. So there are certain procedures to be put in place. But if you do animal experimentation, there are other options. If you talk to your supervisor, or you can come to me or to Prof. Pierre Pistorius, it is not holding you back from doing animal experimentation. But at the moment, it is not, it is, there are issues that needs to be looked at. We are awaiting our final clearance again. That's my short answer.
Thank you so much, Prof. Do we have more questions for Professor Trita? Dr. Mufamadi, sorry to put you on the spot. Do you have any questions? Because I know you have a good number of students. Probably they're wanting you to actually ask on their behalf. Is Dr. Mufamadi still with us online? Okay, it appears we don't have further questions from anyone. So, Prof, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. But should you come up with any questions, I'm sure you know how to contact Prof. You can email her, or you can actually go to the Rec A and see the contact details of the committee. Thank you so much, Prof. Once again, a big applause for Professor Truter for that awesome presentation.
Thank you very much, and good luck for the rest of the workshop. All the best to all of you. Thank you, and bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye. The next presentation this afternoon is on from exploration to proposal, plotting the way schematically. And I'm sure you want to hear that, and you can actually see that is really systematically arranged. After all the Rec A, you need to now complete your proposal. I will just take a few seconds to introduce Professor Denizine. You may not have met her before. You may not have heard about her if you did not study here in any of your previous degrees. Hence the need to just put down these few lines with us. Professor Denizine is the Higher Education Leadership and Management Program Leader for the Women in Leadership Program. Previously, she was the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Learning and Teaching at Nelson Mandela University. Before that, she served for 2 terms as Executive Dean of the Faculty of Education, first at the University of Fort Hare and then at Nelson Mandela University. She has spent the last 3 decades in higher education in South Africa after completing a master's and doctorate in education at Harvard University's Graduate School of Education in the USA. She has served on several boards, including the Harvard Educational Review, where she was also co-chair. Malusi has SA, the USF Dean's Forum, and the DVCTL Forum. As an educational consultant, she has been engaged in a range of research and support projects, with the largest being the Tertiary Education Linkages Project. She was responsible for the gender equity milestone over a period of 5 years, working with 17 HDIs to support developmental projects. Please join me with an ovation that could be heard virtually to welcome Professor Denizine as she takes us through the topic that we have mentioned. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me?
Yes, Prof.
Okay, great, thanks. So I'm not that familiar with Teams, so I just need to make sure that it's actually playing. Is my PowerPoint up on your screen?
Yes, we can see it, Prof. Thank you.
Oh, fabulous. Okay. So a very warm welcome to everybody in the room. I'm just sad that I can't see your faces. You all seem so far away. And of course, no one's in the front row, but I'm not there, so I guess it doesn't matter too much. And I think it's time to bring some focus back into you and why you are here and what it is you are hoping to achieve. So I've got a song for you, but I've left it right to the end of this presentation today so that you can go and listen to it and just unwind. Because what I learned when I was started doing my research as a postgraduate student was that the most important question when you are busy doing your research is a very simple phrase, and it's one that was made popular by Marvin Gaye. Does anybody know Marvin Gaye in the room? Put your hands up if you know Marvin Gaye. Yeah, I see a couple of hands going up there at the back. Yeah, and the song is What's Going On? That is really the most important question in research. What's going on? So I am going to take you through a little journey where we look at, as you get involved in designing your research, what do you keep in your heads as a schematic, as a visual that keeps you on track? I've listened to our dear distinguished professor, whom I'm a huge admirer of, Prof. Tutor, and all she has achieved. I've also seen on your program all the other Rec H forms and the some of the mechanics which are really, really important as you pin down how you're going to go about your research. But I'm going to cycle all the way back to this question of designing your research. And I've put your in capitals because behind any research, there is a researcher. And you need to know why it is you are wanting to do research. So on to my next slide. What you've learned so far, let's see what that is. Firstly, is there anybody in this room who has been in an orientation before? Can I just get a sense, because I don't want to repeat things in a really obvious way. Is there anybody who's done this before besides staff members who's been on the orientation? Is this all your first orientation? I'm not seeing any hands going up from where I'm sitting. So I
don't
think
see any hands as well, Prof. I don't see any hands from the
Okay.
on-site delegates.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Paula, for being my intermediary, my eyes and ears there in the room. Okay, so has my presentation disappeared? Is it still there?
So we are just seeing you better now.
Oh, okay. So I can't see my presentation anymore.
Maybe you have to share it again, please.
Okay, so I'm going to upload it again. Just give me a
you.
minute to do that. Just give me a minute to do that. Then I will. Oops, sorry. Okay, it's coming in. Sorry about that. I don't know where it went. Okay, so we've done that slide. Going on to the next one. So what you've learned so far is, first of all of you, this is your first time that you're in such an orientation. And since yesterday, you have learned the steps on your journey to submitting and presenting your research proposal. You've also learned about supervision, which really is your pillar and your guide, and the relationship and also the responsibilities between you and your supervisor. You've also learned a little bit about some of the support and the resources available via the library, via funding sources, and so on. Quite a lot of time has been spent on getting ethical clearance or getting you to understand those forms, because this really becomes quite a stumbling block for people. And so a very thorough orientation has been provided to you about getting this ethical clearance, both for human and animal. Understanding the compliance in relation to the forms and the paperwork. But my question to you really is, how many of you already know what you want to research? Can I have a hands up? And Paula, can you interpret for me how many hands are going up? How many of you already know what you want to research? I see a couple of hands. How many hands are going up there, Paula?
9. I was told 9.
9 hands out of, yeah, that's great. So you already know what it is you want to research. My second question is, do you know why? Can we have hands going up too? Do you know why you want to research this?
9 again, Prof.
9 again, that's fantastic. So you know what you want to research and why, but there obviously are some hands not going up, and that's okay. So to take us through then to my next slide. Why is research so important? Because I think we always have to start with the why question. And that's why I ask those questions. If you already have decided on what you want to research and you already know why, it's really important to be interrogating that. If you have not yet decided on a research topic and you're still exploring this, then some of what I'm going to be going through with you today maybe of good relevance to you. So why is research so important? How many of you say it's important to get your degree? Can I have hands up? I'm not seeing any hands going up. I see Ronald's going up. Yeah, I see a couple of others going up. How many hands went up, Paula?
We are counting, Prof.
Yeah.
9 hands.
Oh, is it that same 9 people? Yeah, certainly research is important to get your degree, your postgraduate degree. You can't get it without it. How many of you are doing research to get promotion? Any hands? Paula, I'm putting you to work here.
9. We have 3 of them. Oh,
3?
4.
4 hands
4,
going up,
please.
yes. It is important. And for those of you who are going on to academic careers, it certainly is important for promotion purposes to do research and to continue doing research. To get an NRF rating, is there anybody in the room who's doing research to get an NRF rating someday, if not now? Any hands?
Well, they said not now, but one is proudly raising up her hands.
Yeah, that's
for future.
great.
For
That's
future.
great because, I mean, this is an orientation to research. I wasn't expecting any hands to go up yet, so I'm very glad that there is one going up. And of course, you've got some staff in the room as well. So yeah, for NRF ratings, research is really important. Are there any other reasons why people are doing research? Can we ask in the room? Maybe just say it out loud or put it in the chat or say it out loud and Paula or somebody can repeat it. Why are you doing research? I see a microphone being taken around.
Hopefully to make a difference.
To make a difference? To what? Sorry? You're not finished.
In the community.
In the community. Great, great. Anyone else? You see, we also need to give Paula some chance to get some exercises in because she's spending 2 days in this. That's why I've designed it.
Morning, Prof, to make early diagnosis, or let me say early screening and early diagnosis for patients to go on treatment.
Early screenings and diagnosis to get patients to go on treatment, very important. Yeah, without research, we don't necessarily know why we are doing the things we are doing. So critical. It's all part of the why question. Anybody else? Is there another one?
Hi, Prof, to introduce new techniques to our institute to assist our students within the institution and within practice.
Okay, to get innovation going, in other words, you know, so really important reasons that have come up from people to help the community, to provide more to the community, a very sort of very important mission of the universities as well, for community engagement perspectives, research in order to ensure that what you do is sound, has been proven, is based on evidence, was a second reason. And then for innovation, so great. So really important substantive reasons that have come from some of you about why we do research. So my answers to this is yes to all of those, but also sometimes the answer to this could be no. People are doing research not necessarily for those reasons. And the reason why I say yes and no is because often research is so separated from teaching and learning, especially if it's about promotion. People often think that the most important thing to do to get promotion is research. And that is actually true, because that's what the university and higher education system values. But I learned this from Paula. One day in a conversation with Prof. Paula, she was saying to me, you know, but research and teaching and learning are not separate. Everything is about learning. And so I'm putting this up, Paula, in your honor. This particular slide is something that when I was in conversation with you once, you said to me, it's all about learning and what I would call the search for knowledge. So when I was DVC for learning and teaching at your university, I positioned learning and teaching as the search for knowledge. And then, of course, research is where you go deeper and dig deeper. So research, teaching, and learning. And in fact, as our first, I didn't see who was saying what, but I think the first person who answered that question spoke about, it's about making a difference. It's about community engagement. It's about civic engagement. So I think the why of research is what gives us the passion to do what we are doing. If it's only about getting that degree, if it's only about getting that promotion, then often the sustained interest, the patience that you need to continue with research can often be something that disappears. So I'd like to now take you through an approach to designing your research project. I know what follows in this program is going to go into a lot of detail on all the components of designing your research project, and in particular on writing up your proposal. But I want to give you a big picture view, and that's why I'm calling it a schematic. And this is based on the work of someone who was my research professor at Harvard. His name was Joseph Maxwell, or Joe Maxwell, we used to call him. And he did an introductory course to us on both qualitative and quantitative research design, but focusing mainly on qualitative research design. And I found that when I was supervising students or teaching about research, that the schematic that he introduced was the one that was just the easiest always to do. I could sit in a restaurant with a student, and on the serviette, on the napkin, I could draw the schematic and say to him, this is what you need to focus on. So this book, that's the cover of the book. It's in the library. It's also downloadable. So if you look it up, you will find you are able to download it. It's actually quite a small book. I think it's just over 100 pages in length. And it's a fantastic guide, whether you are doing qualitative or quantitative or mixed methods, to really thinking through the why you are doing the research and how to go about it. So I'm going to take you through this very briefly, just to give you this overview, because what follows is going to be our colleague David, who is going to sort of take you through what is required of writing up a proposal for your faculty. So So the basic schematic of Joe Maxwell's, can you see anything on that slide? Because it's not, I can't see bubbles. Can you see bubbles? Like 5 bubbles joining the points there. Can you see those? Can somebody just respond for me? Because what I'm seeing on my screen is not really giving me a good sense of 5 different bubbles. No. Okay.
No, we can't
There
see
it
the bubbles.
is. There it is. I needed to
Oh,
click
there it
again.
is.
Now you can see them. Okay. So if you look in this corner here on the left, top left-hand side of the screen, in that bubble is the word goals. And that's the first piece as you think about your research. And I'm so glad there are 9 of you at least, and hopefully the whole room full, who will be able to say the goal of doing my research is the following. And there are a number of questions that Joe Maxwell asks you to investigate in terms of those goals. They are the why questions. Why am I doing this research? What gave me the interest in this research? What made me start it? What is it that I'm hoping to achieve? Why is it important? So it's all the why questions relating to your goals. And then you go across like you're going to start making a Z. We're following those yellow lines. So you go from the goals across to what Joe Maxwell calls the conceptual framework. In other words, what are the important concepts in this research, in this study that you're hoping to find out more about? You're trying to find out what's going on. What are the important concepts that need exploration? And where do these concepts come from? And that's where it goes then to the literature review, but it also goes to your own experience. So as you go through your template for your faculty's research proposal, there's often a focus mainly on the literature review. Now, many people see that as the only thing that informs the conceptual framework, but I learned that it is more than that. So it could be an experience you had. So let's use the first example that we got from someone in the room. And I wish I could have seen who it was and seen your name, but I didn't. The person who said to make a difference. It could be that your research comes from having seen something happening that should not have happened. Let's take, for example, a horrible example of children who get hurt in the school playground or falling down a pit latrine, of which there has been another recent example. It was so horrible. It's informed your whole sense that this cannot continue to happen. And you ask the question, what's going on? Why is this happening? And you then set out to go and explore just how it is that, for example, the government or schools or the provincial government has not utilized the funding that's necessary, and so on and so on. So the conceptual framework could be something that leads you to the literature. You will then go through that literature, scanning it maybe for your proposal, but maybe in more depth when you actually do your study to find what are the main elements here that I am looking at. And once you have done that, what usually emerges is a gap. And that gap, now we're going down the Z. This is in the formation of a Z. So it goes from the left to the right, and then it goes down in a diagonal. And in the middle of that diagonal, in that bubble there, is the research question or research questions. Because as you explored the concepts, as you explored the experience that you've had, something that connects you to this research project, there's a question that has not been answered. And well, there may be many questions that have not been answered. that informs what your research question is going to be. And from that research question, you then say, okay, so I don't know why this is happening. And the literature is not explaining to me why this is happening or has happened. It doesn't provide an adequate explanation. There's a gap. And that then becomes your research question. There may be sub-questions linked to it, but that becomes your research question. And that in turn takes you through to your research methodology, because your research methodology answers yet another question, which is, how am I going to find out? A method is always linked to the very simple question, how? And in this case, it's, how am I going to find out? And it is really in answering that question that you come up with your methods. Now, you may devise some methods for finding out about that. The question, as Prof. Tutor just said earlier with the case of the 3 baboons, is it sufficient to give you enough information to say, I'm pretty sure that if we do the following, or I'm pretty sure that this accounts for that gap in our knowledge? And that then leads us, of course, to the validity question. How valid is the answer, or are the answers that you find as a result of researching it using your various research methods? Okay, so that is the basic schematic. So that forms a Z going goals, conceptual framework, research question, methods or methodology, validity. It doesn't end there. You'll see that there is a yellow line that connects from validity all the way back. So the validity, then, in other words, goes back to your research question. Are the answers to my research question valid? And furthermore, does that research question actually satisfy the goals that I set out to achieve when I did this research? So this schematic, if you can keep this in your head, it's 5 bubbles. You can draw it anywhere, and it can help orient you to where am I now in getting on with my research project. I'm going to go into just a little bit more detail about each of those bubbles. So in the first one, the issue of goals, you have to be able to answer. It's not here, but you can write this down in your notes, and you will get these slides. Paula can distribute them to you. But with goals, I would say the first question, which I haven't actually written down there, is why are you doing this? Because there's always a personal thing when you choose to do something. People like to regard research as this objective thing, you know, where there are no human thoughts and feeling, well, human thoughts, but no feelings that come into it. But that, I think, is not how human beings work. There's no human being who is completely objective. You choose something for a reason. And so the question is, why are you doing this? And if you know that reason, that is often what keeps you going when it feels like you are getting stuck. So under your goals, you have to ask yourself, what are the intellectual, the practical, and the personal goals that you are doing or trying to accomplish by doing this study? You also have to ask, what is the problem? And so often you will find in your template, it will ask you for the problem statement. And it's as you think through those goals that you will come up with the problem statement. What is the problem that the study is trying to address? And why is it important, not just to you, but to society, to address this, or to your field, or to your discipline to address this? I noticed that you are people in psychology, in pharmacy, in social development, human nutrition. Your disciplines are all important, are all part of the context of why you are doing the particular study you are doing. The conceptual framework, as I said earlier when I was describing the schematic, don't negate or don't dismiss your experience. Your experience informs the conceptual framework. You know, it's like when your gut tells you something, people saying, oh, your gut, what has your gut got to do with it? But there's actually a very, very important connection between the gut and the brain. Research has shown that. Similarly, with your conceptual framework, there is an experience or a set of experiences or a set of observations that are part of what informs the conceptual framework. So acknowledge those, write a little memo to yourself, write in a research journal that only you see about what it is that's making you interested in this. And that in turn leads you to what are the most important theories, the most important ideas, the important knowledge that informs the study. How has what has already been found out shape the study? What is your conceptual framework for the study, and how does it use and incorporate what others have done who have come before you? There's no such thing, Charles Dickens says, as an original idea. All ideas build on the ideas that come before them. We simply have to acknowledge them. But your own experience, your own thinking is what gives it a new slant, a new take. And what do you know? This is an important one, the fourth bullet point. What is it that you know you will not address? What is it that you do not yet know that your study will address? Because that is what gives it its relevance. Going to your research question, these things are what leads you to your research question, especially that last point that I made. What is it that we do not yet know that your study will address? And so your research question really will revolve around what it is you want to learn by doing this study. And if it isn't obvious, your research questions will answer. You'll have to ask yourself, will answering the questions that you've come up with address the study's goals? Because often we formulate questions and they are either too broad, very, very common issue. It's like you have to solve the problems of the whole world with this one question. The more specific you can be, the more focused you can be, the more focused your study will be, and the more possible it will be for you to complete it. And then an important part is, you know, in the form of that Z that I was showing you, how are the questions connected to your conceptual framework? Your research questions, two important points that you need to think about with your research questions. What it is you want to, the two important questions are, how do these relate to what has been done before? There's no point in doing a study, even if you're interested in it, if the answer has already been found to that study. So doing the research when it's already been shown, it might be new to you, but that's why doing the literature review, that's why doing the conceptual framework is so important. Because if the answers are already there, what is the point of doing the study? So you must do the prior reading and some research to identify those gaps. And that is what will create your question. And your study will hopefully help to fill that gap. The second important point is, how does it relate to your own experience? And this relates to the why question and to the goals for doing the study. And it is what gives your study meaning for you. And I cannot underestimate, I cannot, or rather overestimate why the issue of meaning is so important. And it goes right back to what the person said, who said, it's about making a difference. It's about innovation. It's about making sure. The three of you who answered those questions at the beginning, that is the meaning that you are making of your particular research. So, having gotten to that middle point in the Z, the next question then is the research methodology. How do you choose your research methodology? Often I've seen students who are very, very eager to get on with the job of getting the research done, getting their degree done, getting their promotion, or whatever it may be. They start with saying, okay, I'm going to do a quantitative survey. And we're saying, but why? Why are you choosing a quantitative survey? Oh, because it's easy. And because I've learned how to do a quantitative survey, and because somebody will analyze the data for me. And my question is, no, 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 you cannot start there. What informs your research methodology? How you decide what to do has got to be linked to what is it that you want to find out. And so it goes to the issue of data collection. How do you plan to collect the data that will answer that question? Sometimes it's not a survey that's going to get you those answers. It means interviewing people, because there are only particular people who have experienced the particular phenomenon that you are studying. And so you have to decide, what data will you collect? Why have you chosen these methods is something you're going to have to answer in relation to that research question rather than other possible alternatives. And how will the data that you collect enable you to answer the research question, if this isn't already obvious? And this applies as well to doing a survey. So I've seen so many surveys that actually give people options, but those options are already predetermined answers to something that you're still trying to find out. So you give the people the option of what is your favorite color, and you give them red, yellow, blue, and that's all they can answer. You're never going to find out that the favorite color is orange or pink. So with a survey, you always have to be careful that the data that comes from it is actually going to answer the real research question that you are trying to investigate. The second part of research methodology is the collection part. So that's one part of the how, because remember, methods are always about how. The other part of it is, how are you going to analyze that data? What tools are you going to use to analyze that data? What strategies and techniques are you going to use to make sense of your data? So if it's a quantitative study, what are the programs that are going to be used to analyze it? And do you even understand them? I once knew people, I won't say where, in which institution, who had a you know that thing that we do, that paint by numbers thing? There was a thing called getting your postgraduate degree by numbers. There was like a set of steps. Here's your box of literature, go and read it. This is just going to go back to the data, quantitative data analysts. They're going to give you pointers. That is not you becoming a researcher. That's going through the motions of doing research. Your data analysis, you need to be familiar enough with the statistics. You need to be familiar enough to be able to interpret the statistics, besides the person who may be helping you with the software or with some of the technicalities of it. And you need to be able to interpret it. As the researcher who's going to become a master or become a doctor in this particular field, you need to be able to make sense of the data. And in your proposal, you need to indicate how you will use those analyses to answer your research questions. You cannot just give generic descriptions which are cut and pasted or paraphrased from research methodology textbooks. I've seen so many proposals and theses where it's like a cut and paste out of a textbook. It doesn't say why this was important to you. why you chose this. And that is what makes your research, what makes you the master or the doctor in this particular area of your research question. So going further, dealing with, I was going back to that schematic. So again, so there's the schematic, right? The goals will give rise to you saying, what am I working with here? What am I actually trying to investigate? Which gives you, leads into your research question, which is, what is the gap? What is there that's not yet known? Which then leads you to, okay, so how am I going to find out? And next we come to this issue of validity. Because validity is the be all and the end all. It's no point going through a whole hours and hours and days and months and sometimes years of work, only for somebody to say, but these results are not valid. And I've examined so many theses where you're saying, we've had to say to the person, your results are not valid because your design of your research didn't take into account the following things, that your participants were biased, they had a vested interest, or that your sample size was too small and therefore you cannot generalize, or that what you found doesn't actually answer your question. So the connection, that Z that goes backwards, the connection between all of these things is an important part of the validity. You should be able to go back along that trail to see that these things all connect up. So one of the things you need to ask is, what are the most important threats to the validity? I've mentioned a few. One of those is the biases, your own being one of them. It's one of the things with quantitative and hypotheses that I've often worried about, is because you go in with an hypothesis. Often people go in with an hypothesis that they set out to prove. It's not open to what may emerge as, I suppose there is allowance made for that, in that you could have an hypothesis that's completely disproven. But so many people use the notion of an hypothesis very, very loosely. They go in setting out to prove that thing, and then they choose people or they choose methods that's going to help them prove that thing. And that completely invalidates your research. So you need to think about how you're going to address some of those threats to the validity of your conclusions. And at the same time, to be honest about what the limitations are on the generalizability of your results. With qualitative studies, often because the sample sizes are smaller, people have to say, this was the nature of the population that I researched. And I cannot say that it's generalizable to this other context. And by stating that upfront, you're already speaking to the validity of your data. Of course, validity and ethics go very closely together. And I've heard Prof. Truter talk about ethics in relation to animals. I'm sure that I think it was Prof. Dalrich, I think it was, who spoke about human ethics. How do you be accountable to the people who provided you with the data? What are you going to give back to them? And is there any way in which what you come up with by way of findings compromises the safety, compromises the image, compromises the what would one call it? The stature, the respect of the people from whom you've gotten this information. So ethics is a really important part of any research project. And that's why I think your whole program spent so many sessions on those ethics forms, because these are some of the things that you need to think about. This is quite a complicated diagram, but as you can see, right at the core of it are the goals, the same Z, the goals, the conceptual framework, the research questions, the methods, the validity, and then you go all the way back. You can see there are double sided arrows all the way back to goals. And what this is, I'm not going to go into all of this now because there isn't time. But what all of this does is it tells you what some of the things are that you've got to consider in relation to each of these aspects. And it provides a schematic. So if you're going to pin up something on your wall as you're preparing your proposal, these are some of the things that can give you pointers. So from the schematic design to the proposal, what I've loved about Joe Maxwell's proposal, I mean, about his whole way of initiating us into this is the following, and that is that from that Z, which is now just looking a little bit different, it maps onto your proposal. And what you'll see here, I've tried to look at it in relation to your Faculty of Health Sciences proposal, but David Norton will, of course, be going through the template for your faculty in a few minutes, and he will show you exactly what is needed in the proposal. But what I found was that the introduction or the background or rationale, which are sections 1 and 2, really maps very closely onto what you have kind of thought through in terms of your goals. The conceptual framework there maps very nicely onto some of the explorations in terms of your literature review. You'll find that the research question, of course, comes at the beginning sometimes of your goals of your study, but also of section. It becomes a very big section of your methodology, research design and methods. That's section 9 and 10 of the template that you will do. And the validity piece then maps very nicely onto that. So that's it. That's your schematic. I don't know about you, if any of you are visual learners, but when I was busy doing my research, or whenever I'm busy doing my research, these are the schematics I put up on my notice board. And it helps me at a quick glance look at where I'm going, how everything connects up, and then I can put it into writing into the actual proposal. The one thing I do need to say before I leave, and that is that remember your proposal is for a very different audience. The proposal is how you convince your research committee that you've thought through all of those different aspects of that schematic. And the more you work on each aspect and understand it for yourself, the better you're going to be able to translate that into a proposal where you're telling somebody else the story of why you want to do this research and how you're going to go about it. And that's it from me. So if there are any questions, the last piece is for you to watch in your own time. It's that song, What's Going On, but I'm not going to play it now. It's a great song. It's done by Playing for Change. So that's it. Any questions? Anything? I know we kind of just over our time, Paula and people in the room. Thank you. I see the hands clapping.
Thank you so much, Prof. You can obviously see that we're excited and it's been a very informative session. Thank you so much. Do we have questions from on-site and online delegates? Thank you. I can see the virtual clubs. Thank you so much. Do we have questions for Prof? This is your entire proposal. You should have questions. Please ask her. Any hands? Prof, it seems you actually did justice to it very well that there's no questions. I see a message online. Is it a question? Okay. If you can scroll down, please. Let's see the. There's no new message. Okay.
Okay.
Prof, there's no question from us. Thank you once again for the wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. It was lovely being with you. And I know you're going to go through the template with David now. And, you know, all of this will kind of become clearer as he goes through every section of the proposal. Thank you so much. And thanks for the opportunity of being with all of you. I always enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you.
For availing yourself. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Paula. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Great. 12:19. Okay, we are still doing well with time. Dave, you're presenting physical, am I right? Okay, thank you so much. So we'll have our next presentation on introduction to the research proposal, reviewing the proposal template. And as you can see that we really want to make sure that you get it all before you even submit your proposals. So that when it comes to the faculty, FPGSC, we're already smiling. Okay, so Dr. David Martin, the research coordinator in nursing science, who is also very much present at FPGSC. He's been there for years, so your proposal will definitely come through that committee. He's here to tell us more about the proposal template. Please note down your questions. Can we just clap as we appreciate?
Sorry, just waiting for the PowerPoint to pull up. While it's pulling up, there's one thing which I didn't put on the PowerPoint, and that was how long a proposal has to be in our faculty. And there's always a question that students ask. I think it's worthwhile starting out with that and answering that question. So for master students, it's 50 to 100 pages, and for doctorates, it's 100 to 150. Now, just checking to see if you're listening. No, it's actually 10 to 15 pages for master students, and it's 15 to 20 pages for doctoral students. So let me repeat that. It's 10 to 15 pages for master students, 15, yeah, for proposals, yeah. Yes, if I can just add that it excludes the annexures, which can go on almost as long as the proposal. But that's not the actual, what I'm going to present now. I'm presenting the content of the actual proposal. So it's, we try to keep it not too long because all the people at the FPGSC, not all the people, but the reviewers that are allocated to your proposal have to read more than one proposal for every meeting. And so if the proposal is very long, it can make it quite a difficult task. So we prefer it to be as short as possible. And so that's 20 pages is quite reasonable for a doctorate, but we find when people are doing doctorates which include many phases, that it tends to go on a bit longer. So unfortunately, we have to put the limit. We know that some people might go over it, but try your best to try and work within those that framework. While we are waiting for this to buffer, there we go. What I'm presenting now is the layout of the actual proposal. And I know sometimes, especially for master students, it can be a little bit confusing between the master's, the proposal itself and the actual dissertation. And so I want to just re-emphasize, this is the proposal, which is that sometimes people, they also call the design, the blueprint, but it's also it's the blueprint or the plan for your entire study is captured in this proposal. And what I'm going to just present to you here is like a linear presentation of each of the points as we go through the proposal. And we as a faculty, we do have a template, which is a guide. Every department has its own approach, but we have a faculty guide, which is to help you to try and cover every aspect that you need to cover for your proposal. So we don't have a lot of time. I've got to get through the whole proposal in a short while. So let me see if this is going to work. Yeah. Good, thank you. Okay. Zuki's going to arrow for me. Okay, there we go. So very briefly, the goal of the research proposal is a concise and coherent summary of your proposed research. So think of it as a summary in a nutshell in 20 pages, your research. It sets out the central issues or questions that you intend to address. So you are going to, so whoever reads it will know exactly what it is you're trying to do with your research. It outlines the general area of study within which your research falls, referring to the current state of knowledge with regard to your topic, any recent debates on the topic, as well as demonstrating the originality of your proposed research. And it's particularly with doctorates, you want to also come up with some unique contribution to your research. Okay. This is just basically is taken from the table of contents for your proposal, but this is basic outline. These are all the points that you need to cover throughout your proposal. So that's just, you can see it starts off with the abstract, keywords, declaration, introduction, background, rationale, problem statement, research question, aim or purpose, objectives of the study, concept clarification, research design, research methods, reliability and validity or trustworthiness in qualitative, ethical considerations, dissemination of results, work and time schedule, budget, conclusion, and then references and annexes. So in a nutshell, very quickly, that's everything that you have to cover. You'll see that with some of them, they are unpacked further. So there's a lot to unpack, for example, under research methods. It's quite a long section, and you would have heard a lot about research methods today in the discussion around the REC-H, because a lot of the ethical issues fall under that aspect of research methods, the data collection, the population and sampling. Those all are addressed there. Thank you. So first of all, the title. The title is very important to any study. So it must tell the reader where the study is taking place, who is being studied, should be concise. You should avoid unnecessary words, avoid repetition, should avoid abbreviations or acronyms, should be grammatically correct, and should be logical. And titles tend to differ from masters to doctorates. Masters, often they use the word like investigate, explore, while you tend to find with doctorates, it's about strategies, guidelines, models, and so forth. So they're often in the title of a doctorate, you find that the outcome or the product that is going to be developed in doing this study is placed right up front, so the reader knows this is what the study aimed to do, is to produce something, while the master's is looking to explore something or determine something. So in the title is then presented on a title page. This is the title page, and everybody has to have the same title page. So all the details there, and what we've tried to do is just include the principal investigator and student. That's just to show you the link between the proposal and the REC-H form, because in the REC-H form, there's a distinction between the PRP and the PI, the primary responsible person. That is at the bottom there, you can see that is your supervisor or your promoter. So when you write the PRP in there, that is your promoter or supervisor, and then in your REC-H form, you will put that same name in there. And then for you are the primary investigator. So that you'll put also again in your REC-H form. And just remember, with regard to the PRP, one of the big things in the REC-H form, and I'm sure it's already been dealt with, is that when it comes to your data, your PRP is meant to safeguard that data for you. So they take responsibility for you as the PI. And then you can just see you put down your degree, your department, and it's the faculty. And more or less the same layout is used when you submit your final thesis or dissertation to the exams office. Your abstract. So try to just keep remembering this. The abstract is always done at the end. So when you finish the whole proposal, then you write the abstract. Some people like to put it up very early on. Your supervisor is going to be probably telling you, hang on there, you only need to do it at the end. But if you feel like doing it, do it, but don't bother to show your supervisor and just sort of lay it out. Because sometimes you want to just anticipate what it could look like. And it can be helpful to some people. So it's not the wrong thing to do, but we normally encourage you to do it last. So because it's a summary of the whole proposal, and you only know once you finish the proposal what is going to go in the abstract. But you do know some things. So usually it's compiled once your proposal is complete. It provides a brief background to the study. It states the aim or the purpose or the goal of the study. That's usually paragraph 2. states the design and theory, the population and sampling, data collection and analysis, and it states the rigor or trustworthiness of the study, as well as the ethical principles that will be upheld. So it's usually one page, and then you've got more or less 4 paragraphs in an abstract. We try to keep it within that page. Thank you. On that very same page, at the bottom of the page, you'll have your keywords. And the keywords are not the same as the concept clarification. These keywords are used for any publication that's academic, whether it's a journal article or whether it's a thesis. They always have keywords. And the reason why they have the keywords is because Google and all the other databases that are out there, they use the keywords as well as the title of your study as a reference point. So if somebody types in the keywords that you have on your thesis, there's a good chance they'll find you. So you want to try and increase the chances of being found. So what we normally say is make your title and the keywords different as far as possible. Sometimes it's not practical, but if you can make your title, the keywords to be synonyms of your title, that increases the net and more people will probably find you. If you have the exact same keywords as in the title, fewer people are going to be able to find you. So it's really just to get yourself out there. We usually just limit it to 5 keywords. That's the usual thing that we do. Then once the keywords also are normally arranged in alphabetical order. The next is the declaration. This is standard. Again, it's also included in your thesis and dissertation when you finish. And then just keep an eye out for that. We will share with you the template, and you can just copy and paste it into your proposal. But basically, it's your name, and you are pretty much signing off, your salary to the Faculty of Health Sciences. Now, I'm joking. It's actually saying that you're not going to plagiarize. That's the main thing. That what you're going to put out there is totally honest, and you have abided by all the rules of plagiarism, and it's a reliable source. Okay, so you're kind of putting it out there that you are not going to be plagiarized. I don't want to say cheating because often people plagiarize without knowing that they're plagiarizing, and so we can't be overly critical, but we have to highlight it or emphasize it because it's a key thing for academic writing. Is that you can't plagiarize because you can actually be disciplined for it. So, and it's an ethical issue. Thank you. Table of contents, ensure that this is in line with the content of the proposal. I know it sounds very basic, but that is required. Make sure your page numbers are in alignment with your proposal. And if you can, use the MS Word option for if you haven't found it out, ask somebody. Word gives you the option to have an automatic table of contents, and then all you have to do is update it whenever you change anything in the proposal. So if you can, it's going to save you so much time instead of having to go physically or manually trying to change the pages every single time you make an update. Okay. The introduction, as it says, an introduction introduces the study to the reader. It describes briefly what you will discuss in the proposal, and is usually not more than half a page in length. This is just a guide, a recommended guide, half a page, but you could actually make it longer if you felt it's necessary. But then there's a question mark whether it is an introduction if it becomes a couple of pages long. But it depends on, again, your department, but this is the recommended. Your background, I think this is a question a lot of people ask. People always ask how long. It's a big question for all students. So how long should your background be? Well, we would like it to be 4 to 5 pages. And then just a thing which you always harp on is how old are the articles and books in the background. We try to aim for 5 years. More emphasis on the articles than on the books. So if the articles are older than 5 years, there's always a question mark because, are there no more recent sources? Because articles are based on current research, is it possible that more studies have been done? And that's the background is important because it underpins your problem. And so if the sources are old, we would like to know, is there a reason why the sources are old? And you might have a good justifiable reason. Like, for example, there's been few studies done on this recently. And so you can perhaps argue, well, actually, these are the most recent ones. And it also justifies now why I must do the study. But otherwise, aim for 5. Thank you. The rationale is, sorry, yeah.
Background and literature, are they the same thing?
Yes, thanks for the question. It varies again from department to department. I know the Department of Psychology likes to have a background or intro followed by a literature review. So they structure a little bit differently, and there might be other departments which do something similar, and that's okay. In the Department of Nursing Science, background and literature review are considered to be the same thing. It's the background to the problem. So you just consult with but when I'm presenting here, I'm referring to the background and the literature review as the same thing. So that's the background could almost be like an intro for some departments. Literature review, background. The reason why it's called background is because it's the background to the study, while a literature review, particularly when you move from the proposal to the actual study, will be a whole chapter. The background will tend to be in chapter 1 just as a brief overview of the entire, just as an intro to the reader, while the literature review can be a whole chapter, and usually chapter 2 is when you introduce your literature. I don't know, does that answer your question? Okay, just a word of caution when it comes to research, and it will frustrate you, especially if you are very systematic and you like things to be clearly laid out. In the writing of research methodology textbooks, there's so much variance in the terms, and you'll start to tear your hair out because say, but this one says this is methodology, and this one says methods, and what do they mean by theory? This one says theoretical framework, this one says conceptual framework, and you get a whole lot of things. The main thing is that when you write, you explain to the reader what you mean by that. So you just make it clear. It can literally be in a sentence or a phrase, so that the reader knows what you mean by this, and you've got a source to support what you're saying. You're good to go. But you don't want the reader not to be confused by what you're saying. So as far as possible, just support everything. You guys probably studied poetry when you were at school, and I always said, if you can justify why you are making this claim, then we will accept the answer. And you're not doing poetry, thankfully for you, but you will be able to get away with a lot of things, not to get away with them, but you'll be able to convince people if you've got the evidence. So the rationale, which this is optional, but the reason why we include it, because at one point Rec H had a rationale section, and I think it was, it's a nice thing to have, because it's the difference between a problem and a rationale is that the rationale is a justification for the research. So you're telling the reader, this is why I want to do the study. For example, Department of Health has identified this problem as a key issue within South African healthcare. And so that's a good reason to do the research. It's different to the problem, which is something that you want to solve. You're explaining the issue at hand that needs to be fixed, solved, or changed. So the rationale is quite nice, and it doesn't have to be very long. It can be 300 words if necessary, but yeah, I think talk to your supervisors and ask them if that's something that they would like to include. Okay. Problem statement. This is where probably the most challenging of all the sections of the proposal, and it's not just students who struggle with it, supervisors struggle with it as well. It's really everything hangs on this problem, and if you get the problem wrong, it can mean you having to change your design at some time in the future, in order to make the problem actually make sense. Or I've experienced having students from other countries present the problem, but because I don't know the context as well as they do, I'm relying on their knowledge about the context. And it happens sometimes that you misunderstand what they understand the context to be, because you're relying on them to communicate it to you. So if your supervisor doesn't know, say you're an international student and they don't know the context, you really have to work hard at explaining to your supervisor what it's all about. so that you can convince them that this is something which is genuinely a problem. Don't ever try and cut corners with the problem, because it can literally land you in hot water further down the line. So the problem describes the ideal situation. It should ideally be in a few sentences. It describes the problem to be investigated, also in a few sentences. It contextualizes the problem to your area of work. Provide one or two anecdotal examples of the problem. This is not always possible, but those of you who are on the clinical platform, or have been in the clinical platform, or know of people on the clinical platform, it's quite nice to be able to share the problem in an anecdotal way. You've heard this happen. Sometimes newspapers can capture that. Newspapers highlight, obviously this is not reliable evidence, but it suggests that there is a problem. And if there's enough newspapers out there highlighting this issue, it's not going to be, you can't base your whole problem on a newspaper. That's a disaster. But you can certainly include it just to sort of emphasize or highlight the context. And really nice is if you can include some statistics, but local statistics, not global statistics, because your problem is local. So you want it to be whatever. And sometimes that's really difficult to find local statistics because maybe there's just no information out there. But there are certain sources which can provide some nice statistics. And then if you're desperate, you can go to the clinic, for example, or to the hospital and say to them, or phone the hospital manager or whoever and say to them, can you give us an idea of, for example, how many children are admitted with diarrhea on a monthly basis? And they could tell you that at the clinic. And then that highlights the fact this is quite a problem, because this is telling me that this is there's so many coming. That means something's not happening. There's a problem out there that needs to be addressed. So you can use because every month or every week there's a meeting to discuss statistics and so on in the clinic, and so there's information out there. And then of course refer to existing studies if you can do that. It's not always available. If you're doing a quantitative study, it's nice to provide a qualitative study which suggests that this research should be done because they've found there is an issue there. So yeah, that's the problem statement. Okay. The research question flows from the problem statement. So the problem statement must lead to the research question. The research question is open-ended. Ensure it is congruent with the title and aim and objectives, and it should begin with how or what. Very quickly, and it applies to the research question, the aim and the objectives and the title should all be in alignment. So often students are tempted to be creative in the way that they present their work. And that's admirable that you would like to be creative and interesting. But sometimes when it comes to the proposal, being very simple, straightforward is better for you. And you'll feel that you're more in control. You might feel like it's a little bit repetitive, and that might be frustrating for you, but it actually works out better because you're demonstrating, you're just strengthening the argument by showing this alignment. If there's a disconnect between, for example, the title and the research question, immediately the reviewers are going to ask questions. Why is it like that? And you'll find as your proposal evolves over time, you sometimes forget to change the other areas. So you change the aim, looks beautiful, but you forget to change the title or the research question or the objectives. So always make sure you go back and double check that it is still in line. And little tip, make sure that your annexures, your letters to the participants still reflect the new aim, or they reflect the new aim and the new objectives, because sometimes the reviewers will pick it up and then they'll realize, okay, this was the original idea. This is what it's doing here. That explains why the problem statement doesn't quite make sense. It's because things have changed over time. And so you're constantly having to cross-check your work, which is not easy when you get really, really close to the study and you've been spending a lot of time with it. You almost need another set of eyes, a friend. You've made lots of friends now, so you can ask people to just have a quick look at this. Can you pick up anything that's maybe missing? And that's recommended. Okay, I'm obviously got to keep an eye on the time. I'm going to go quite quickly now, but this will be shared with you. So the aim is often a difficult thing for people to sort of get their minds around. Some people call it a goal. Some people call it a purpose. Often in qualitative research, they tend to use the word purpose more than aim or goal, because it's not like just my mind's just forgotten now who said it. But basically, if you quantitative research often works with hypotheses, and so you can say that the goal is to disprove or prove the hypothesis. There's a very clear aim, a very clear goal. But with a quantitative study, you don't always know what you're going to get. It's like a box of chocolates. So you have to kind of allow and be aware that things could change unexpectedly. And it must be very much in line with the objectives and the research question and the title. Objectives are often difficult for people to sort of work with, but essentially the objectives are there to show how the aim will be achieved. And sometimes, especially with qualitative research, it's difficult to sort of present the objectives in a way which is convincing and not repetitive, because it's not meant to be identical to the aim. Quantitative research is easier because if you've got very specific variables, you can say, well, these, if I am able to address these variables, it will help me to answer the aim. Okay. Suki. Thanks. Now we move to concept clarification. Often this is something that students often avoid or find boring, or they leave it till the last minute. I recommend that you take it reasonably seriously, because the concepts are those ideas, those concepts that are important to the study. And just to give you an idea, if I'll use the nursing as an example, say you've got professional nurse as one of your concepts, but a professional nurse in a critical care unit is not the same as a professional nurse on the clinical, at a ANC clinic, and a professional nurse who's working in a doing bloods in a path lab is not the same. They're all different. And even within the hospital, you can have an orthopedic nurse, and you can have you can have a nurse in a medical ward. They're all professional nurses, but they do different things, got different responsibilities. And so you need to make your concepts clear. Even though you might think it's obvious that everybody should know what this is, in your study it might mean something different. So it's important that you make it clear. And then so what you do is you present the concept using some a dictionary, a medical dictionary, or any other formal textbook, methodology textbook, or even an article if it's it's relevant. And then you show the reader, how does this term relate to your study? So in other words, you apply it. Some people say operationalize it. So you just show how this word makes sense within the context of your study. In fact, everything in your proposal should be contextualized or related to your study. So it's very easy to fall into the trap of just presenting the theory and not actually showing how it relates to your actual study. Thank you. So I was going to read this because it's quite nice, I think. Anyway, so this is the theoretical framework, and it's often one of the biggest challenges for students to get their minds around. But you're not alone. This is something which is, it's not only students who struggle with it. It's any researcher trying to find that perfect theory. And some people have sort of taken a theory on board and they've made it part of their life's work kind of thing. And so they will perhaps request their students to choose this particular theory, but your theory is also guided by your choice of topic. So it's a blueprint for the entire dissertation inquiry. So it's going to guide your inquiry, this theory. It serves as the guide on which to build and support your study, and provides the structure to define how you will philosophically, epistemologically, methodologically, and analytically approach the dissertation as a whole. And this is quite a nice quote. The theoretical framework is a structure that guides research by relying on a formal theory constructed by using an established, coherent explanation of certain phenomena and relationships. A selected theory or theories underpinning how you understand and plan to research your topic, as well as the concepts and definitions from that theory, are relevant to your topic. So your theoretical framework, one page would be fine. Some people do less, some people do more, but approximately. I think the point that the word I've always found helpful to understand what the theory's purpose is as a lens. So if you were to put on a different pair of sunglasses that shows everybody to look red, it's going to make you look at the world through a red lens. But if you put on a set of blue sunglasses, it's going to make everyone look blue. So you look at the world differently. So that's what the theoretical framework does, amongst other things. It's got certain major concepts or constructs within the framework. And then it forces you to ask questions that you wouldn't normally ask. So if a theoretical framework has an emphasis on, for example, empathy, if you're going to conduct your study and you don't include any kind of questions around empathy, then people will ask the question, well, why did you use this theoretical framework? Because it hasn't guided you in the way that you look at the problem. So try and look at rather than seeing the theoretical framework as an add-on, see it as something that's going to guide you in the way that you ask your research question, in the way that you frame your aim, in the way that you structure your questionnaire or your interview schedule. Because if you've got an interview schedule that doesn't have any sort of connection to your theoretical framework, when you are writing up, it's going to be very difficult to show how the theoretical framework is in alignment with your findings. But if you actually include the variables that are in the theoretical framework in your questionnaire or in your interview guide, it's going to be much easier because it's going to come out of what the participants say, if that makes sense. So if you can see it as your friend rather than as your enemy, the theoretical framework. Okay. Research design. So this is.
It's not clear what you're saying to me. Is this where you would discuss something like if you're doing a qualitative research, is this where you would discuss like your phenomenology or positivism and all those visms in terminology? Is that where you discuss that?
Good question. Thank you. So there is a difference, and I haven't put it part of the proposal. And thanks for asking that question, because I'm sure others might have the same question. There's a difference between your paradigm and your theoretical framework. So your paradigm is your worldview, while your theoretical framework is a particular theory that you've chosen to look at a specific problem. So, but your worldview will also influence which theory you choose. So you could have a worldview which is positivistic. So those of you who are quantitative, you could say, well, I want to look at the world through this lens of quantitative research, which is about hypotheses and looking at your different variables, independent and dependent variables. And so that's how you're going to attack this problem, with a very positivistic approach. Or you say, well, I'm going to take critical theory. Critical theory is linked to the Marxist approach, where you're looking at sort of destabilizing and trying to see, well, what happens if? And you're really looking at some of the words that they use is disruption, and that links to other theories as well. So, but you're coming from a point of view of wanting to bring about change. So there is a difference. So those of you doing, it's not so much using masters, the paradigm is used a little bit less, but much more in the doctorate. Doesn't mean that you can't, and it doesn't mean that your supervisor won't ask you to include, to say, what is your paradigm? But it might just be a sentence, so that they'll say, my paradigmatic perspective is. The other way to describe it is a worldview. So if you can, I don't know if that helps to answer the question, but thank you for the question, because there is a distinction. Yeah. So yeah, the research design, you have quantitative, qualitative, mixed methods. Those are often, we call them approaches rather than the design. And some people sort of group it together again, this whole idea of different words having different or used differently within research. But you need to say, do I explain what this means in relation to my study, the research design? Describe a design that falls under this approach. So, for example, you could be descriptive in quantitative research, correlational, quasi-experimental, and many, many, many others. And then if it's qualitative, you might say it's ethnographic, phenomenological, grounded theory. And then you get some, like phenomenology, which could also be a worldview, as well as a design, as well as a method. Just to make life simple. So then we get to the research methods. So starting off with population, very important. There's no doubt, and I'm sure Dr. Grady was highlighting this over and over again, the choice of the population and the choice of the sample is often very much an ethical choice. You have to ask yourself, I've got this group of people that I want to be part of my research. Are there any issues if I include them? And so already when you're trying to decide on who you're including, you have to think ethically. It's one of the most important decisions, because you might have this wonderful research question, this wonderful idea, but it might not be doable because of the population. So for example, if you did research on prison correctional services, and trying to think of the correct terminology, not inmates anymore, but if you wanted to do research on people who are, in jail, they are difficult to access. They are a vulnerable group. And when I know of a student, a doctoral student, who did research on inmates in a Zimbabwean prison, and he managed to do it. But again, it's just very, very sensitive, and you might find, for you personally, it just might not be doable. Even though you find it fascinating, you might find you just, from a practical reason, your wife won't let you do it. It's just not going to happen. There's lots of factors. Sorry about that. So in other words, there's lots of reasons why you might not do it, because you might be influenced by your family members. You might be influenced by your financial situation. So when you think of your population, think about all those things. Thank you. Oh, and please mention the size of your population, or your approximate size of the population. It's important to put that up front. Sometimes it's very difficult to determine that, but at least give it an approximate. And then you're going to say which your sampling method. So in your proposal, state right up front, the researcher will be utilizing a purposive sampling method. It sounds very simple, but just to tell the reader straight up front, this is what I'm doing, and then you can explain what it actually means using a methodology source, or included in the actual statement. And then eligibility criteria. I don't want to repeat what was spoken about today, because the Rec H covers all of those things. But the idea is that you want your proposal to overlap with the Rec H. So what we've done here is included which sections in the Rec H will be covered by these items in your proposal. Okay, thank you. Once again, indicating your sample size, the Rec H emphasizes minimum and maximum sample sizes for both quantitative and qualitative. And if you're doing mixed methods, you want to be sure that you include for your different groups that you might be doing, or your different approach. So you might have a quantitative leg, which is obviously the sample will be much bigger than your qualitative leg. And so you want to make sure that the reader knows that. The idea is that if you make sure that you have all these things in your proposal, it's not difficult to transfer the information to your Rec H form. It's just going to make your life easier. Of course, there's the recruitment and the enrollment aspect, which are two different things. There might be a little bit of an overlap, or things might happen. There's less of a time gap between the two, but it varies from study to study. But I'm not going to go through it because of the time, but thank you. You're going to have to cover the recruitment aspect. And then data collection. I think the more detail that you provide here, the better. If you can give lots of details about how you're going to go about collecting the data, it's just going to make your life easier for your own mind, because what sometimes happens is, if it's a little bit vague, when it comes to actually doing the data collection, you kind of have to think now, what happens now? When you actually have got permission and you've got to begin the data collection, you should be able to just go straight to your proposal and see, okay, this is what I need to do now. And so that's, sometimes it helps just to even pretend that you're phoning the person that you need to speak to at the hospital or at the clinic. And then I've tried this with students. I said, imagine that you're phoning the clinic. Okay, so you've spoken to them. So when are you going to go and see them? What are you going to say to this person? So, okay, so how many trips are you going to have to make now to that clinic? So you phone them, say, okay, you want to bring the letter, information letter. They want to read it first. So then you go back home or back to the campus. A couple of days later, you go back to them to collect the letter, the permission letter. You go back home again, collect the questionnaires, wait for the people to come, take it to them. They must complete it. You go back home again, and then you got to go and fetch the questionnaires. So petrol's going up, next month. And so, and your petrol's going to go up with all those trips. And that's just one clinic. You might have 6 or 7. So it's just helpful to think of the basic steps. And then you realize, oh, okay, there's quite a bit that has to be done here. It's going to make your life a little bit easier if you think like that. And just with regard to the data collection, the questionnaire is important. So make sure that you really think about that questionnaire. Remember, I spoke about the theoretical framework. Think about, does the theory reflect in the questionnaire? Even better if you can find a questionnaire which is already existing and validated, which was just going to enhance the quality of your research. Okay. Data analysis, similar, try to, because quantitative and qualitative data analysis, try to think about the kind of analyses you would like to do for your different variables that you have. So, and that, if you think about this, if you've got certain objectives, you want to make sure that they are linked to the analysis. And they're very closely related. If you're doing quantitative, you want to make sure that the analyses are going to answer those objectives. And you want to make sure that the questionnaire is going to help you to answer those objectives. Because you can't run those statistical tests if you haven't included the necessary questions in the questionnaire. In the case of qualitative research, it's a different approach to doing analyses, but there's a whole mass of different types of analyses that you can do, and neither of the two are easier than the other. If anybody has the mindset that qualitative research is easier than quantitative, that is like, no, it's not, and vice versa. They are both equally, if you do them well, they're both difficult to do and both equally rewarding. The pilot study, just keep this in mind. If you have a small sample and you need to do a pilot study and you've got to use up some of the people in your sample in order to do the pilot study, it means it reduces the number in your pilot. So just keep that in mind. And then you also have to ask yourself, if it's a small sample, can I do quantitative research on it as it currently is? Or do I need to spread my wings further and look to include another province? Or and then the question is it practical? So you have to think about that. Pilot studies might come as a surprise. In qualitative research, it's sometimes accepted if the pilots actually are well conducted and you get good data to include that pilot in your final analysis. But in quantitative, that's a no-no. Whether it's good or bad, you don't include the pilot in the final analysis. It's kind of a standard practice. Some people might challenge that, but from my understanding, it's pretty much no. And then reliability and validity or trustworthiness. These are things that it's worthwhile thinking about now already, about, okay, how will I enhance the reliability of my study? And how will I enhance the trustworthiness of my study? So it's worthwhile just looking, particularly if it's quantitative, if you have a questionnaire that is already a validated questionnaire used by a number of studies, your reliability is immediately going upwards. In the case of qualitative research, I'm going to talk about that tomorrow, so we can unpack that a bit further. I don't think I need to talk about this because you've done a good morning's worth of ethical considerations. And I think it wouldn't be ethical for me to do it any further. Thanks. And as you can see, it's a lot, but it is important. So then dissemination of results, all this means is how are you going to share your findings? It's also an ethical component and it's included in the RecH form. How are you going to share your findings? Because you have a responsibility to share your knowledge with others, particularly with the people with whom you collected the data from. You know, they have a right to know what you found out. And you have different ways of doing this. So sometimes people will do a workshop. Some people might just share the information in the form of a summary of the findings. And then, of course, for your own academic growth, it's really nice if you can present your findings at a conference. It's even nicer if your supervisor sends you an academic conference to a distant land, because that's really exciting. It didn't happen to me, but anyway, maybe you guys will be more lucky. And then, of course, you can present a poster, you can present a conference, oral proceeding, or a podium presentation. So I just want the others to be able to hear you.
Thanks, Jack. On the dissemination of information, let's say you're doing a research on a phenomenon in a certain industry. For example, maybe you're looking at the telecoms industry. And then should you share your findings with them?
Thanks, a very good question. When it comes to the sort of vested interests and conflict of interest, thankfully the Faculty Postgraduate Studies Committee and the Rec-Age Committee would deal with it, because it is an ethical issue, and they might flag it depending on what it is that you're doing research on and who's involved, and if you are an employee of the company or yeah. So it's a valid question. But I think the ethics committee and your supervisors will have to make that call, depending on all the issues that are at stake. Yeah, if it's a patent or something like that, again, it's a whole can of worms. But it's a very valid question. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So the time frame is very important. This is the basic one, but I really recommend if you can get hold of a Gantt chart. And for the entire, so you envisage doing your study for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, depending on your situation, and then work your way backwards. So start at the end, that's graduation, that's walking across the stage, and then you look back and see, okay, how do I get to the stage? And then this is much broader. This is what all you have to do for the proposal, but for your the actual study, the whole duration, you might want a Gantt chart, and it might stretch over a number of pages. I'm not going to go into detail. Just want to have a double check here. Yeah, no, I'm not going to go into detail for this. Keisuke. Did I miss one there? Sorry, so you put the budget there, sorry. The budget is really, really important because it's also an ethical issue. So just remember, if you are beginning your studies and you think that you might be affected by financial issues that might undermine your study, or the data collection process, you don't have the funding for it, ask yourself those sort of questions, because there are hidden costs when doing your research, more than what you think. And rather think about it now, and that also could influence how you do your research and what you plan to do your research on. And you might choose the route which is the least expensive, just for practical reasons. And on the other hand, you might have a supervisor who has a large research account, and they might say, "No, don't stress. You know, we've got it sorted." But it just depends on what the study is all about. Sorry, I'm 8 minutes past. Sorry. And conclusion, just going to say what happened in the proposal. You're not going, don't fall into the trap of some students start to write up the findings in the conclusion paragraph. This has happened. But it's just really just saying, okay, this is what was in the proposal. And then the references, really, really important. And Dr. Tenembaloy will share with you referencing an EndNote. But your references are, you know, when an examiner gets the thesis to examine, very often they turn to the back and they open up the references and they go through the references. And if the references are not in a good state, they immediately start asking questions about your study. And then they go to the in-text and see, well, they reference this one, it looks a bit dodgy, and they go and look in the in-text, sure, what was this person saying? So immediately it starts to be, these questions are asked. So make sure your references are tip-top. It's more important than you can believe. Sometimes it's left to the last minute. Try not to do that. and see if you can get EndNote on, because it's going to make your life much, much easier. Okay, I can actually hear the rumblings. Suzuki, annexures, this is the last one. I just want to say, your annexures, you heard what Dr. Del Rey was saying about the Rec H, and there's a lot of annexures which need to be in line with your proposal, in line with the Rec H form. So don't sort of neglect this. Again, it's something which is often afterthought. Try and spend a little bit of time on those annexures. There's quite a number of them there. I won't go into detail, but make sure that they are applied and also up to date and in line with the aim, objectives, and title. And also practical. For example, if you have a letter to an online participant, it's not going to be the same as a letter to a face-to-face participant. It's going to take a different form, but also try and be a little bit practical regarding that. And that's my references. Okay. You may now, unless there's other questions, I was going to send you off to go and get rid of that hunger. But if there is anybody who'd like to ask a question, I don't know if there's anybody online. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for the presentation. But I have a question with regards to the abstract. Since like basically the abstract is like a summary of like the proposal or your project. So I wanted to know, you include sort of like your introduction and your methods, like a summary of all those things. And I wanted to know with like the results, do you include maybe your anticipated results, or like you don't include anything with regards to your findings or whatever?
Thank you. Yeah. So there is a difference between, yeah, absolutely. You wouldn't talk about results at all. You only, because at this stage, it's just a proposal. So it's your plan for how you're going to go about collecting those results, and how you're going to go about analyzing those results. So you wouldn't refer to the results at all. Yes. Yes, you'd be, yeah, maybe it's tempting to put something there, but so your question has led to is that your abstract for your proposal and the abstract for your thesis are very different.
Yes, I know that like since you're still writing your proposal, you don't have result at all. So you're still writing the proposal. So I wanted to know, do you include your anticipated results, or maybe like you don't include anything on results, since like the abstract is like the summary of like your project? I hope you get what I mean.
So the answer is still no. Yeah, we don't, because you can consider yourself personally what your results might be, and often that's guided by your hypothesis. You know, if you have a hypothesis in mind, yeah, but you wouldn't share that with the reader at this point, because it's too early to say. But it's no harm in you actually trying to think what could possibly happen, because that's also going to guide you and how you structure your questionnaire and so on. So yeah.
Maybe just to be sure that you're aware that you could include in the results section how you plan to analyze your data on receipt. So those lines can fit in there in the abstract.
Thanks, Prof. So yeah, reached the end of this presentation. So thank you for sticking it out. Thank you.
Thank you. You get tired clapping so easily, maybe because lunch is, but there's lunch. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Martin, for that very, very insightful presentation. I'm glad you were asking questions in between, but do we have any burning question? Online delegates, do you have a question? So we all understand everything about the proposal, the Rec H form, no excuses now. So please, if you have any question, please ask now. Good enough, we still have Dr. Dare here in the venue, and Dr. Martin is still here. Don't ask me when they leave. If you remember the question then, Don't ask me. Ask now, please. It's important. You. Oh, great.
Sorry, Prof, to take you back. There's a statement that I'll call it Dr. DG, earlier when on the opening of the questionnaire, like where you said you do not really want someone to say, I'm a Marvelous Mudanganyi doing a research about this. What could be the better opening statement on the questionnaire?
No, actually, that sounds fine. What I meant was, don't say something like, you must complete the following survey because I need to get my qualification. You know, you don't state it in a way that speaks to your needs. You state it in a way that speaks to what you're asking them to do. So you do need to introduce yourself. You do need to say the study is about X, Y, Z, and this is what I'm asking you to do, why it's important in a sentence, you know, but just not in highfalutin academic speak, in a way that they understand instead.